I have disconnected and labeled all of the wires that lead from this tuner subchassis right here out into various places in the radio. And so now all I really need to do is unbolt this subchassis and lift it out. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but I'm going to tell you something, man. I do this all the time. I take really good notes. I write them small, and it's shorthand because I am used to reading my notes. But I let myself know where these things come from because I don't know how long it's going to be before I get to putting this stuff back on. So, for example, that terminal strip where it says 2, 3, and 4, that's here. And I've labeled the terminals, and that way I can find it. And I've also labeled the wires that go to those. So that's really going to help me when I go to reassembling this. And I do that on all of them. You know, all the different wires and so forth. I put on the little tag where it goes. So for this one right here, for example, it goes to the terminal strip next to the tone control. It's number 10. So you look right there, goes to that fourth terminal on the terminal strip next to the tone control, and I've labeled it number 10. And I've also indicated that it's a black wire. So, oops, wrong one. It is a black wire. That it's a black wire. And I've shown which terminal it goes on that terminal strip. So there you go. I have good notes. Now I can go ahead and pull this subchassis out and get to work on the two chassis as separate units. Let's go ahead and lift this chassis off. I did neglect a few minutes ago when I showed you that to point out that I had to disconnect this ground. This ground goes through this little hole right here, and it attaches to a lug on the inside, on the underside. There are 4 screws. All right, so we have a screw here, screw here, screw here, and a screw down there. And these are flathead screws. There is an isolation grommet under each one of these. So this thing is suspended on these isolation grommets. So I'm going to go ahead and get these screws loose. Now there is a lot of corrosion on this chassis, so I'm really hoping that these screws are not corroded tight. So let's just see. Okay, that one's not bad. Hey, it's always the one that's hard to get to that you can't get a good turn on. Oh, good. That would have been close. All right, so let's do these down here. These look cleaner. Oh, I think that one broke. That's just great. They will break, and then you'll have to get them out. So that becomes a real pain. I'll go ahead and remove these. Maybe it did not break. Let's take a look at the screw. Sure felt like it did. Nope, screw is good. Under each screw is a star washer and a little fender washer. This is what the screw looks like, a little flathead screw. So I'll store those in a baggie. Considering the condition of this chassis, the main chassis, I'm surprised that these actually broke loose as cleanly as they did. I thought for sure I was going to break one. All right, so I ought to be able to lift this off of there, and might take a little work. It's been a while since it's been off of there. These grommets are kind of stiff and they don't want to pop loose, so there we go. Ooh, grommets flying everywhere, guys. Okay, look at that. Go ahead and lift this chassis right out. All right, before I do something dumb, I want to set this aside so I can get a good look at it in a little bit, but first I want to take care of some business. So what are we left with? Well, we're left with this main chassis. These grommets look to me like they were a gum rubber affair, and they just broke apart when I lifted it off. But in any event, that's not really a bushing so much as a that's like a bushing that's part of the radio chassis, it looks like. Yeah, so it's basically a little standoff that is pressed into the radio chassis that you can screw the screws into, and that's good because that's something I don't have to worry about replacing. These grommets are in really sad shape. I'll save all the pieces. They'll help me size the replacements. Now, there's one of the standoffs right here. You can see the threads in there. You can see the threads that that screw goes into. That serves as a bushing through the grommet. And if you know about radios, you know that those bushings act to prevent you from screwing down so tightly on the mount that you squish the grommet out of shape and take away its ability to be suspension for the chassis. I may do some cleaning, but I'll probably do that off camera. You've seen that half a dozen times with me. And I'll leave this transformer in place and I'll clean it up, and it'll be a fairly simple matter to mask it off, and I'll repaint it black just to make it look fresh. I'll use a semi-gloss black. I don't want to make it look new and shiny if I can help it. This, if you've been wondering, this is the socket for the 6U5 tube, and you can see that that 1 meg ohm resistor that's always there has been broken apart. This is great because unlike the Zenith ones, which is basically a long barrel with a socket shoved into the end of it, this one here is going to be fairly easy to take care of. So that's nice. I don't know yet whether I'll replace these wires. I got to get a better look at them. I try not to replace them if I can help it, because it costs the customer more money and it takes away from the look of the radio. So, all right, let's get a look underneath now. So this is a lot easier to handle. It's a lot lighter. And it sits on my bench on these cans for the IF. Look at how much easier it is to get to everything in this guy, and that was the point. So I'll be able to get to all these capacitors now real easily, and I'll be able to get to this tone control, clean it, same with the volume control. So this is going to be great. These capacitors that were around the perimeter of this tuner section are going to be easier to get to and replace. Boy, these are some of the nastiest. This is one of the nastiest looking chassis underneath that I've seen. It's a combination, it looks like, of poor assembly to begin with and poor repairs during its life. I just can't resist it, guys. Take a look at this. Take a look at some of this soldering. That is a mess. That's a mess. And there's a lot of it too. Some of this stuff, I don't know what was going on. Why? It seems to be like a real low quality solder too. It's not smooth and shiny. It seems almost porous. You can see that. And it's all over the radio. I'm going to have to rework a lot of those. That's going to take a ton of time. So this radio is not going to be a short radio to do, although I'm not going to bother a lot of you with video of this because it can get pretty dull. This electrolytic capacitor here has two leads, the two positive leads you can see right there. And I cut them off, and I'm replacing that electrolytic capacitor with these two right here. I had mentioned earlier in the vid that I didn't have any 12s. Well, it turns out I did. These are 450s, and I don't need 450s, but that's okay. I will put those in because I have lots of them. I didn't realize I had them, and they'll work great. So I connected the positive from each capacitor to exactly the same spot that the leads were on this capacitor, and then I created a new ground right here with the ground lug from this terminal strip that I have. And that works out real nice because it's convenient and easy. There's less wires to track around, and it should be fine. And whenever you do this, by the way, don't just screw the terminal strip in and then use that as a ground. Make sure you solder that. If you can see what I did here, you solder that terminal strip lug to the chassis so you get a good electrical connection. Those nuts will work loose, and then your electrical connection will suffer. All right, check this out, guys. This is how I found this. And there are lots of this kind of thing in this particular radio. This 15K power resistor is part of the voltage divider circuit that you see right here. Okay, so you have your B plus is developed down here. It comes up and it's exposed to this voltage divider circuit right here between the 15K and the 5K. All right, so this particular resistor, this 15K right here, has a terminal here that either was not, I'm sure it was soldered at the factory, but somebody did a repair on this and never soldered this. Like, there's nothing I love better than soldering in midair. Now, I shouldn't be. I'm gonna take a cue from Radio TV Phono Nut and not beat up on the last guy because I make a lot of mistakes and I'm still a newbie and there's a lot I don't know. But the truth is, this kind of stuff here usually doesn't mean that somebody didn't know what they were doing. What it usually means is somebody was in too much of a hurry to do it, a nice, neat job of it. Like I said, I make a lot of theory mistakes, circuit mistakes, but the work I do, I try to do neatly so that, somebody looks back at it later, they at least don't think I was a slob. I pointed out earlier that I had a lot of solder joints that look about as good as this guy right here. And what you do with that is you reflow them. So let me show you what one looks like that I've reflowed, and I'll explain what I mean. Here's one example of a spot where the solder was a real mess, and all I did on this was reflowed the solder, which means just add some heat to it, allow the solder to liquefy again, and add a little bit of solder, new solder as needed to get it to flow smoothly over all of the items that are connected to it. And then of course I also, when you're reflowing, you want to use a little bit of rosin flux, and then once you're done, you want to clean that flux out of there. And it's usually pretty easy to clean it out because it's smooth, and the stuff, when it's fresh, it's still sticky and it comes out pretty nice. So it's a little hard to clean this with one hand, but I think you get the idea. The lacquer thinner is just about dry on my Q-tip, so I'm going to re-wet the Q-tip and finish cleaning this up. I've run into several dog bone resistors, by the way, that have been pretty well spot on. I marked them on my schematic so I know why I left them. So that 30K, I measured 31.6K. That's well within, that's within easily 10%. So I'm good there. I think that's about about 5%. And then that 300 ohm measured out at 298 ohms, so no need to replace that. However, the 15K that I had in there measured in at about 19K, so that's off enough that that's more than a fifth, that's more than 20%. So what I did was I took a couple of 33K ohm resistors out of my bin that measured slightly low, and when I married them together, I got about 16.5K. So that's good enough for that. That'll work really well. And looking up at the 6F6, there is a cathode bias resistor, a 500 ohm, that sits there, number 66. That thing measured in at 502 ohms, and that's a big dog bone, but I don't see any need to replace that. If it's at 502 ohms, it's going to be fine. There is that 500 ohm power resistor. I know that dot looks orange, but it's really brown. Just the color rendering's not that good. And that goes from right there, pin 8. This is the 6F6 we're looking at. Pin 8 of the 6F6 straight to ground, just like on the schematic. The more I look at this chassis, the more I think that, you know what? I think it would be better for me to go ahead and remove this transformer and remove all 3 of these capacitors and work from there. So I've already told you many times that I don't like to restuff caps. There's a lot of reasons for that. I thought about restuffing these, but then I thought, no, I would rather not mess with the construction of these. The way I see it, we restore old radios to kind of preserve radios for how they were built. We want to be able to show some, people down the road what these radios were like. Well, we're kind of removing part of the story when we destroy an old capacitor by cutting it open, removing the innards, and then putting something modern inside of it. I think that's actually destroying more of the radio's history than just mounting capacitors on a terminal strip right there, because then the only permanent thing I've done is drill a couple of holes. But here I've actually removed part of the original construction, and I really don't like to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull all three of these out. I'm going to label very carefully where all the leads go. I have a good schematic, so I'm not going to get lost. And I'm going to go ahead and disconnect all these transformer wires. They're really easy to get to. It's not like they're snaking all over the radio where I can't find them. They're real easy. They're right here. So I'll go ahead and determinate this transformer, and I'll lift the transformer off, and then you see, it'll be a really simple matter, I believe, to kind of rework this chassis, at least this side of it. I will tape off the tube sockets. I'll probably have to work with some navel jelly, but I'll tape off the tube sockets. They're open, so I can flush them with water if I need to. And that's not going to hurt a thing if I flush some water down through them or flush them through from the other side. And I'll go ahead and clean up these mounting rings for the caps. You see, they're already loose, so that's not a big deal. And at least this 2/3 of the radio will be really a simple matter to go over, at least the top side. And the back side shouldn't be any big deal. The stickers are already shot. There's nothing I can do about the stickers. So I'll go ahead and rework that as well. My biggest challenge then will be to avoid hitting these transformer cans, because they're aluminum and I don't want to hit those with acid. But yet if I remove the cans, I risk damaging the transformer. So I'm just going to have to be careful on these. I'll tape them off in case I get a little crazy. And then I'll have a little challenge working around these pots. If I have to, I'll just, I'll unscrew these pots, drop them down into the chassis if there's enough wire to do so. So I really think that's the best approach to do a thorough job on this chassis. And then I'll go ahead and paint it. I got to thinking about it. I'm really not going to discolor it much. If I have to solder on some lugs, it's not going to hurt that much. And I'd rather just go ahead and paint this thing and get it out of the way. So we'll see how we proceed. But that's really the next best step, I think. I think this is corroded enough that I need to do a much better job. And I was scrubbing on this with some navel jelly. And it was going to take a lot of work. And I'm having to work around other things too much. And I'm risking damaging this stuff. So I'll go ahead and yank all of it. I would just about beg you to do this kind of thing yourself. You see, I'm getting ready to pull this transformer out. I told you I was going to do that. And I have gone ahead and labeled every single lead. I'm not going to count on the schematic. I'm not going to count on my memory. My gosh, I can't remember to take the garbage out on a Thursday night. But I am going to count on my notes. All right, so I've labeled where each one of these goes. Before I remove them, I've got this video. I would normally take a photograph, or I would suggest to you to take one. But I have this video to refer to. In fact, by the way, a little side note, guys. When you're working on these old radios, it might not be a bad idea for you to video what you're doing, even if you never intend to show that video to anyone else. The reason I like videos is because videos can give you many angles in one shot if you're hand holding the camera. And even if you're not, sometimes you can move things around in a video like I'm doing right now, and you can show yourself stuff without having to take multiple photographs. For example, if I want to see this ground lead down here at the bottom of the chassis, then I can go ahead and move the leads so that I can see the ground lead, and then I can wiggle the ground lead that I'm referring to. Okay, this yellow and black ground lead's coming from the transformer and going to this nasty ground lug right here. And then I lower this one back down, and I've got this black lead here going to one side of the line switch that's mounted to the tone control. So you see what I'm saying? You can give yourself a real good reference if you videotape yourself versus taking photographs. But that's up to you. Do something to keep a record. Make notes like this, and then do more than that. Take a photograph, or like this one here is going to pin 6. Take a photograph, or take a video so that you know what you have to work with. Now, let's look around the chassis a little bit. Okay, since I'm getting ready to recoat the top side of this chassis, I'm going to have to do both sides. I'm going to have to do this up here as well. So I'm going to have to make notes of everything up there that I remove that impacts the other side. Now, luckily on this chassis there aren't many, but on other chassis you would have a situation where you might have to do that. So if you're ever going to have to remove most of the things from a chassis, take very good notes, make a video, and keep that video handy at least for yourself. And you know, you can change the angle of the video a little bit too if that's helpful. Sometimes I find that to be quite useful if I do this. And then I have an even better record of what I've done. And then lastly, sometimes if you zoom in and then pan around, you'd be surprised how many times you'll refer back to that video. And if you're taking that video in good resolution, well, then you can pause it at any point and see what it is you were looking at. I don't know, this is my way of doing it. I think it's very useful because soon I'm going to have these caps out. This transformer here is going to be out, and this is going to be pretty bare. And I guarantee you that I will forget where these things go if I don't do what I'm doing right now. I have all the wires disconnected from this transformer. This big mess of wires. They're all labeled. They're all kind of stiff, and the last thing I want to do is change their sort of set, because then that set will give me a clue in case I get lost reinstalling this. So I'm going to unbolt the transformer from the other side and try to lift this out of there without messing that up too much. All right, I'm going to go ahead and remove 4 screws. Before you do anything, grab yourself a baggie, put the screws in there, and don't forget to label it, just in case you drop it in the wrong place. Alright, nice and loose. Looks like it's going to come right out of there. Want to be real careful and not be pulling on the wires too much. If you have to, slide them out one at a time. Okay, because the last thing you want to do is damage this transformer. Try your best to maintain the direction that they were set. There we go. Got ourselves a transformer. Alright, so what I'm going to do is it'll be an easy matter to separate the clamshell here and remove them from the main iron. I will clean these up and spray them with a matte black. Alright, that's a piece of cake. When you're doing the laminations, you really don't want to sand there or get in there with a wire brush or anything like that. What you want to do is just lightly scuff it with a Scotch-Brite and then spray it with some rust converting primer or some rust converting paint, and then spray it matte black also. You want to avoid messing up, getting metal, you know, any kind of bridging across the laminations or anything like that. They're lacquer. They're supposed to be coated, and you want to leave them that way without horsing with them too much. I'll also recoat all these wires with lacquer. I might put some shrink tubing on some of them. It'll be clear, just to kind of keep, you know, now's a good time to put shrink tubing on them without, because these are hard to replace, so I don't want to be messing with the insulation much. But the insulation, you know, these always are cracking a little bit. And so if you put some clear shrink tube on them, shrink it down, it looks real nice, and it adds that insulation that you might need if this stuff starts to crack. So for now, I'm going to set this bugger aside along with the tuner chassis, and I'll get to work on the main chassis. Alright, I'm kind of glad I did that, because you look at this chassis here, and this is really corroded badly. Taking a closer look at what we have here, the surface of this metal is quite pitted. It's corroded and it's pitting. You can see that here where I cleaned up some. So thankfully there are only 2 tube sockets on this side, and these things here are steel. So there's really not any aluminum to worry about, and the tube socket exposure is going to be minimal. So I will take a little bit of tape, and I will cover these up. There's no way I'm going to be able to keep from getting in there a little bit, but I'll flush them with water when I'm done. I'll cover these up. I'll go over this with some navel jelly. I'll scrub it with a wire brush as I'm doing it, and that's going to be the best I can do. If I can't get it out, if it doesn't get any better looking than this, then I will spray it. I will paint it. If I can get it all to look something like this here, then I don't need to paint it, but I got a feeling that's not going to happen. So I'll get to work on that. The real challenge is going to be when I get around these guys right here, because that is aluminum. When I get down around here, I'm going to have to be really careful to not get any naval jelly up on this aluminum. I do not want to remove these because then I'm exposing the transformer underneath, and that's even worse. So I'll have to be real careful here, but I think I can manage it. Okay, I've done some cleaning on this. I did a lot of it with naval jelly, but I have to be very careful, as I mentioned, of those cans. And also, I really don't want to get too much down in the tube sockets and stuff, and I'm not a real big fan of slathering naval jelly everywhere. I have a different approach I like to take that's worked really well for me. So I'm going to get a little bit of that off of there still. It's a little tough because those things are riveted on, but I can get a little bit more than that. But then once I do that, unless I get where I really have to scrub like crazy to get down in those pits, there's no getting the rust out of the pits. So what I'm going to do instead is I use a product that I used to use when I did automotive work. That's a rust converting primer. And basically it chemically converts the rust to something that's inert, that won't continue to spread or grow into more rust. And once that stuff cures, then you sand it a little bit, and then you spray some regular filler primer on it to fill in the pits some. And then you spray it with paint, and I use a stainless steel paint that's rather thick itself, has high solids, and it'll fill in the pits a little bit too. And by the time I'm done with this thing will be pretty smooth, and it'll look roughly the same color as this chassis looks now. So I really don't want to go too much more around the bend on this, because I really don't want to damage things with with the naval jelly. So that's the status of this. In the next video, you'll see me probably after I've sprayed it with the rust converting primer, because I'm going to have to do that out of my shop, and it gets a little bit messy, so I really don't want to be breaking out the video camera during that. But it's not that hard. I'm just going to sand this a bit to rough up all the all the metal and get it kind of prepared, like I've done on this side right here. I've got a little more to do here. And once I've sanded it and prepared the metal, I'll tape everything off, and then I'll spray the primer on, and I'll go on with the next the filler primer, and I'll probably show you something in about that time frame, and then I'll go ahead and paint it. All right, guys. Well, this is Michael, and I want to thank you for watching. It is Friday, the 12th of May, and I got a new camera in the mail today, and I'll show that to you very soon. So I'm kind of eager to get on that too and get playing with it. So from your Western Outpost in Salt Lake City, this is Michael, and that's all for now.